The luxury dealership went silent the moment Ethan Parker stepped out of his rusty pickup truck with his little daughter beside him. Salesmen smirked. Customers stared. One manager coldly told him, "This showroom isn't for people like you." Humiliated, Ethan quietly picked up his daughter's backpack and walked toward the exit until a black executive car screeched to a stop outside. The dealership's female CEO, Victoria Hale, stepped out, then froze when she saw the battered pickup in the parking lot. Her face turned pale. Because 10 years earlier, that exact truck had once saved her life, and the man they just insulted was the hero nobody recognized. Ethan Parker was the kind of man the world had a habit of overlooking. At 38, he had the hands of someone who had worked hard since the day he was old enough to hold a wrench, calloused palms, knuckles permanently stained with grease no matter how long he scrubbed. He was a mechanic at a modest garage on the east side of the city, the kind of place where the coffee maker was older than half the staff and the fluorescent light in the break room had been flickering for 3 years without anyone replacing it. He didn't complain. Complaining required energy he preferred to spend elsewhere. He spent it on Lily. Lily was 8 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her the most lovable and occasionally exhausting creature Ethan had ever encountered. She had a gap between her front teeth and a laugh that started somewhere deep in her belly and arrived without warning, like a summer storm. She was, without question, the only good thing Ethan had left. The truck he drove was a 1994 Ford F-150, faded red the way autumn leaves go brown before they fall, not with elegance, but with the quiet resignation of something that had simply endured. The front bumper wore a dent from a parking lot incident in 2011. The passenger side mirror was held in place with electrical tape and hope. On cold mornings it started only after the third try, and in summer the air conditioning produced something closer to mild disappointment than cool air. But Ethan kept it running. He always kept it running. It was the last thing he and Sarah had bought together, back when they were young and slightly reckless, and believed that a reliable truck was the foundation of a solid life. They were not wrong. They were just not given enough time to prove it. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now. Pancreatic cancer, which is the kind of illness that doesn't ask permission and doesn't leave room for negotiation. She was 34 when she was diagnosed. She was 35 when she died. And Ethan had been keeping everything together ever since the garage shifts, the school pickups, the bedtime stories, the grocery runs, the parent-teacher conferences, the nightmares Lily still had sometimes, the mornings when neither of them felt like getting out of bed but got out anyway. That was what love looked like from the inside. Not romantic, not cinematic, just relentless. He had been saving for the SUV for 2 years, setting aside a small amount each week from his paycheck, $40 here, $60 there, whatever the week allowed after groceries and utilities, and the occasional school field trip fee, skipping the lunch specials at the diner, driving past the new action releases at the theater, not renewing the streaming service when it increased its price. Not for himself, for Lily. Because the highway felt different now than it had before Sarah died. Like the road itself had become a place where terrible things could happen without warning, and he needed to know his daughter was surrounded by something built to protect her. He had done the math obsessively. He had a spreadsheet on his phone, the kind of spreadsheet that a mechanical engineer keeps precise, color-coded, updated every Sunday morning over coffee. The numbers were finally right. He had been ready for 3 weeks, but he had waited for a Saturday when the weather was clear and Lily was in a good mood, because he wanted the day to feel like what it was, a good day. A day they had worked toward together, even if Lily didn't know all the details of the working. He had chosen the dealership carefully. He had read the ratings online late at night, squinting at safety scores and crash tests and parent reviews. He told Lily about the plan on a Tuesday morning, and she had clapped her hands and said she wanted one the color of blueberries, which made him laugh for the first time in a week. They dressed up a little that Saturday. Lily wore the yellow cardigan that still smelled like the detergent Sarah used to buy, and Ethan put on the clean-collared shirt he saved for special occasions. They drove across town in the old pickup, the engine grumbling its familiar protest at every red light, and they pulled into the parking lot of the largest and most prestigious dealership in the city, just after 10 in the morning. The building was enormous, all glass and steel and polished surfaces that caught the autumn sunlight, like a hall of mirrors. The cars inside gleamed under recessed lighting, as though they were sacred objects, displayed in a cathedral. Ethan turned off the engine, and for a moment, both he and Lily just looked at the building in silence. Then she said, "Daddy, do they have blueberry ones?" And he said, "Let's go find out." The moment they stepped out of the truck, everything shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of shift you feel before you can name it. A salesman near the entrance glanced at the pickup, then at Ethan, then at Lily, and let his expression settle into something carefully neutral that said more than contempt ever could. Another salesman on the floor, deeply engaged in conversation with a couple in matching cashmere coats, looked over and made the decision not to look again. Two women near the front display vehicle turned toward each other and murmured something that ended in a quiet, shared smile. Lily didn't notice. She walked with her eyes wide, touching nothing, amazed by everything. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. He was the kind of man who had learned to carry those moments quietly, folding them away somewhere they couldn't reach him while he was busy being a father. He tried to catch someone's eye. He smiled. He waited. No one came. A family in linen and leather was helped immediately. A man who arrived in a silver sedan and wore a watch that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly rent was guided to the premium floor with warm handshakes and genuine smiles. Ethan waited 11 minutes by the clock on the far wall. Then Lily tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Daddy, that man keeps looking at us." She meant the salesman near the velvet rope, a young man in a pressed suit who had been watching them with the fixed attention of someone monitoring a problem that hadn't quite become an incident yet. Ethan heard the comment from somewhere to his left. A man in a linen blazer, speaking not quite quietly enough to the woman beside him. "You know how it is. Some people just come in here to take pictures." Lily heard it too. Ethan saw the way her chin dropped, the way the brightness left her eyes for a moment, like a lamp with a loose connection. That was the moment the manager appeared. He was a broad man, with the confident posture of someone who believed himself to be doing the world a favor by existing in it. His name tag said, Raymond. He walked toward Ethan with the deliberate pace of a man who had done this before and felt perfectly comfortable doing it again. He spoke in a low voice, but not so low that the nearby customers could not hear if they chose to, and several of them chose to. "Sir," Raymond said, "I think there may be some confusion. Our vehicles here begin at $65,000. We also have pre-owned locations across town that might be a better fit for what you're looking for." Ethan looked at him steadily. There was no heat in his eyes, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing about his expression, just a calm, worn patience. "I'm not confused," Ethan said. "I've been saving for this for 2 years. I want to buy a family SUV. I have the money." Raymond's smile did not reach his eyes. It never had. "Sir, these vehicles aren't really." "Aren't really what?" Ethan asked quietly. Raymond paused. He was a man who had learned to rely on implication rather than statement, to let the space between words do the cruelest work. He looked at Ethan's shirt, clean but not pressed. He looked at the boots, worn but not fashionable. He looked, briefly, through the glass, at the battered red pickup in the parking lot. Then he said, with the tone of someone offering charity, "The vehicles here cost more than most people's homes." Lily's hand found Ethan's. She held it with both of hers, the way she did when she was scared, but trying not to show it. Ethan felt the grip. He did not look down at her. If he looked down at her right now, he would lose the composure he was fighting to hold. And he could not do that in front of her. He could not let her see him break. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried to find the words that were dignified without being desperate, firm without being angry, human without being vulnerable. He couldn't find them in time, because Raymond turned slightly, a practiced, dismissive pivot, and gestured toward the exit with a motion so casual it was almost contemptuous, and said, "There's a lovely pre-owned lot on Whitmore Avenue I think would be more your speed." A woman nearby lowered her eyes. A man in a blazer pretended to examine a brochure. One younger customer, perhaps early 20s, still new enough to the world to feel uncomfortable with what he was witnessing, pulled out his phone. He began filming. Ethan was already turning. He picked up Lily's backpack from the floor where she'd set it to look at a display. He held out his hand to her, and she took it without a word. And they walked toward the exit with the quiet dignity of people who had survived worse things and knew it. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dry. He did not look at Raymond. He did not look at anyone. He looked at the door. Just the door. They were 3 steps from it, when the sound of brakes, sharp, sudden, definitive, cut through the lobby hush. A black executive car had stopped outside. Not parked. Stopped. The way things stop when the driver is too occupied with what they have just seen to complete a routine action. Every head in the showroom turned toward the glass. A woman stepped out. Victoria Hale was 35 years old, though in any given room she carried the weight of someone who had lived twice that inexperience. She was lean and precise, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse the color of winter sky. Her dark hair pulled back without a strand out of place. She had the kind of stillness that made rooms quieter when she entered them, not because she demanded attention, but because she simply occupied a certain gravity that made attention inevitable. She was the CEO of Hale Automotive Group, which owned this dealership and 11 others across the state. She visited without announcement. That was the point. She had learned years ago that the most honest version of any operation was the one you saw when no one knew you were coming. She had intended to walk through the showroom floor with her eyes open and her conclusions private. She had taken 3 steps into the parking lot when she stopped moving entirely. The old red pickup truck. It sat at an awkward angle in the first parking space, its dented front bumper glinting in the morning light, the electrical tape on the passenger mirror catching a brief gleam of October sun. She had not seen that truck in 10 years. She had, in her quieter moments, thought about it. But she had not seen it. She stood very still. The way a person stands when memory strikes faster than reason. Her driver, Marcus, said nothing. He had worked for her long enough to recognize the difference between her thinking silences and her remembering silences. This was the second kind. Victoria stepped forward slowly. She put her hand on the hood of the truck, and through some convergence of physics and emotion it felt warm, and that warmth moved through her palm and up her arm, and arrived somewhere behind her sternum as a kind of ache she hadn't expected. 10 years. The memory did not come gently. It came all at once, the way cold water comes when you step into it, complete, total, without warning. She had been 25 years old and newly promoted to regional director of her father's company, driving alone on Route 14 in the middle of January, the kind of January that arrives in the Midwest like an argument no one can win. She had been on her way back from a client site, running 40 minutes behind schedule, telling herself the roads were fine because she needed them to be fine. The snow was falling in sheets by the time she realized the road conditions were worse than the radio had indicated. She had taken the curve too wide, or the ice had reached the tarmac before anyone had marked it, or some combination of both. It didn't matter which, because the result was the same. Her sedan slid sideways off the road, down an embankment, and came to rest against a stand of birch trees with a violence that filled the cabin with a sound she still sometimes heard in sleep. The airbag had deployed. The windshield had spiderwebbed. She was alive, stunned, her ears ringing. Her seatbelt cutting across her collarbone with the insistence of something that had just done its job. Smoke was beginning to rise from under the hood, and she understood in the specific, crystalline way that fear sharpens understanding that she needed to get out of the car before it became something she couldn't get out of. She couldn't get the door open. She tried the window. The mechanism was dead. The smoke was thickening. She could smell something she did not want to name. She was pressing herself against the passenger side, trying to think clearly through the ringing and the cold and the rapidly narrowing options, when she heard it tires on gravel above, and then boots on frozen ground moving fast, purposeful, without hesitation, and then a voice, calm and direct, that said through the cracked glass, "I'm going to get you out. Don't move your neck. Can you hear me?" She could. She said yes. The window came in. He broke it clean at the corner, covered the glass with his jacket, and reached in and unlocked the door from the inside. He pulled her out with one arm across her back and one beneath her knees. The way you carry someone who might be hurt in ways that aren't yet visible, and he got her 20 feet up the embankment before the engine caught, and the smoke became fire, and the fire became noise. She was sitting in the snow, wrapped in his jacket, shaking. He was kneeling beside her with blood on his left hand from the glass, asking her name, asking if she could feel her feet, asking all the things that needed to be asked. She told him her name. He told her his. It was Ethan. His truck, the same red pickup she was looking at right now, idled on the road above them, its hazard lights blinking orange in the white afternoon. She had been airlifted to the hospital 40 minutes later. Mild concussion, 2 cracked ribs, nothing that didn't heal. She had sent a thank you letter to the address he gave her. It came back undelivered. She never found him. She had thought, occasionally, that she should have tried harder. She had thought, with the kind of guilt that is easily rationalized, that it was probably fine that people like him didn't need things from people like her, that her gratitude existed even if she had no way to deliver it. She had been wrong about that. She was about to understand how wrong. Victoria straightened. She looked through the glass of the showroom. She could see the back of a man in a blue shirt, holding a small girl's hand, walking toward the exit with a posture that said he was holding himself together by will alone. She walked through the doors. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but absolute. Whose truck is that, in the parking lot? Everyone turned. No one answered immediately. The lobby felt smaller than it had a moment before. Raymond, who had been watching the father and daughter approach the exit with the quiet satisfaction of a problem being tidied away, turned toward Victoria with an expression that shifted recognition, then the beginning of alarm, before settling on professional courtesy. "Miss Hale. We weren't expecting." "Whose truck is in the parking lot?" Victoria said again. Not louder. Just slower. The young customer with the phone glanced down at his screen, then back up. Lily turned around first, because children often sense the change in a room before adults admit it. She looked at the woman in the charcoal blazer, and the woman in the charcoal blazer looked past her at the man beside her. And something happened in Victoria's face that Ethan, when he turned, could not immediately name. It was recognition. Not the polite kind, the other kind, the kind that comes from having once owed someone something that was never repaid. "Are you Ethan Parker?" she asked. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Ethan stared at her. He searched his memory and found her face in a place he hadn't accessed in years, a snowy embankment, a smoldering car, a woman wrapped in his jacket asking questions about herself the way people do when they're checking whether they're still real. "Victoria," he said. It wasn't a question. He just said it, as if confirming a fact that had unexpectedly become relevant again. Her expression held steady, but something shifted beneath it. A relief so old it had almost become grief. "Yes," she said. Then she turned to Raymond. "Tell me what happened here today." Raymond hesitated. He was a man with good instincts for self-preservation, and he was using all of them now, calculating the distance between what had happened and what could be claimed to have happened. He opened his mouth. The young customer with the phone stepped forward instead. "He filmed it," Lily said. Her voice was small and clear in the silent room, a child's voice saying the only true thing. The young man, to his credit, looked at Raymond, then at Victoria, then held out his phone without being asked. Victoria watched the video. She watched it once. She handed the phone back without a word. Then she looked at Raymond for a long moment, the kind of look that doesn't require volume or expression to communicate everything necessary, and said, "Lock the showroom. No new customers for the next hour." Raymond's face went the color of old chalk. 2 salesmen behind him found sudden interest in the middle distance. The couple in cashmere coats exchanged a glance and began quietly collecting their things. The lobby, which had earlier been a place of ambient luxury and polished surfaces, had become something else entirely. A place where a truth was being uncovered, one layer at a time, with the patient, and merciless efficiency of someone who knew exactly where to pull. Victoria walked out through the glass doors to the parking lot. And after a moment's pause, Ethan and Lily followed. The three of them stood beside the old red pickup in the pale autumn morning, and for a while none of them said anything. Victoria ran her hand along the side panel of the truck in a way that was not performative. It was the gesture of someone confirming that a memory is real, that the thing you have carried in your mind for a decade actually exists in the material world. "I looked for you," she said. "I sent a letter to the address you gave me." "I moved the next spring," Ethan said. "After Sarah got sick, we needed to be closer to the hospital." Victoria nodded slowly. She looked at Lily, who was watching her with frank and open curiosity, the way children watch things that seem important to adults. "Is this your daughter?" "This is Lily," Ethan said. Lily said, "Hi." Victoria said, "Hi, Lily." There was a pause. Then Lily, with the directness that is the exclusive property of 8-year-olds, said, "Daddy fixes this truck all the time. He's been fixing it since before I was born. Mom used to say it was his other child." Something crossed Victoria's face. "Your mom sounds like she was funny," she said. "She was the funniest," Lily said simply. The word was past tense. It sat in the morning air between them. Ethan cleared his throat. "She passed 3 years ago," he said, in the even, practiced voice of someone who has said that sentence enough times that the mechanism of saying it has become separate from the feeling of it. Victoria looked at him for a moment without speaking, and in that silence she was recalibrating not just the morning, but 10 years of accumulated assumptions about where that man had ended up. "You came in today to buy a family car," she said. "Yeah. For Lily. Safety ratings," he said. "The highway scares me now, more than it used to." He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. She understood the sentence completely. Victoria reached into her jacket for her phone and made a call. Ethan didn't catch all of it. She stepped a few feet away and spoke quietly, but he heard his name, and he heard the phrase family vehicle, and he heard the words top of the line. He looked down at Lily, who was leaning against the side of the pickup and examining the electrical tape on the mirror with the concentrated attention of a scientist. "What do you think is happening?" she asked without looking up. "I think," Ethan said carefully, "that something is about to happen that I'm not sure I know how to handle." Lily considered this. "Is it the lady from the car accident?" He stared at her. "You heard that?" "I hear everything, Daddy." "You know that." He did know that. He forgot, sometimes, because she was 8. Then he remembered. Because she was Lily. Victoria returned. She stood in front of Ethan with her hands at her sides, not in her pockets, which would have suggested casual, not crossed, which would have suggested defensive, just open and present. "I want to give you a car," she said. "The best one we have. No charge." Ethan looked at her for a long time. There were several things moving through his expression at once, and the one that eventually settled on top was not gratitude, exactly. It was something older and more complicated. "I don't want charity," he said. Not harshly, just clearly, the way he said most things. Victoria did not flinch. "It isn't charity," she said. "I owe you my life. That's not a metaphor. You pulled me out of a burning car. I was airlifted to the hospital 40 minutes later. If you hadn't been on that road," she stopped, started again. "This isn't pity. This is a debt that is 10 years past due." Ethan looked at the truck. He looked at Lily, who was now looking at him with the expression of a child who deeply wants him to say yes, but is also deeply proud of who he is, and doesn't want him to become someone different. He looked at the building and thought about what had happened inside it 20 minutes ago, and about the money he had saved, and about the number of dinners he had eaten standing over the kitchen counter so Lily could have the table to herself for homework, and about the look on Raymond's face when he said these vehicles cost more than most people's homes, as though a person's worth was denominated in real estate. "I appreciate it," Ethan said, "but I have the money. I saved it. I want to pay for the car." Victoria looked at him the way you look at something that surprises you. by being exactly what you hoped it would be. "All right," she said. "Then come inside, and I promise you will not leave without the right car." She paused. "And I promise that no one in that building will look at you the way they looked at you this morning. Not while I'm here." Inside the dealership, the atmosphere had undergone the particular reorganization that occurs when power arranges itself differently in a room. Raymond was standing near the back office, very still, with the posture of a man who knows the reckoning is coming and is simply waiting for it to arrive. The sales staff moved quietly, purposefully, without the performative ease they'd worn earlier. Victoria walked the floor with Ethan and Lily, and she did not delegate. She asked questions, real questions, the kind that require actual answers. What kind of driving? City and highway both. Cargo needs? Lily's school gear. Some equipment for the garage. Her exact words, "Does she spill things?" Lily answered that herself. "Only orange juice, and only on Tuesdays." Victoria smiled. It changed her face in a way that made her look younger, and also more real. She led them to the SUV. It was on the premium floor, the kind of vehicle that had been engineered with the particular obsession of people who believe safety is not a feature but a moral obligation. It came in 7 colors. Ethan asked Lily which one. Lily said, without hesitation, blueberry. The color was technically called deep sapphire, but it was, unmistakably, the color of blueberries. Ethan stood beside it with his arms at his sides. He put one hand on the door panel, not the way Victoria had touched the truck, but differently, with the tentative reverence of someone touching something they are not yet sure belongs to them. Lily pressed her nose against the rear side window and fogged it with her breath. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "This is the one." Victoria turned to the sales manager, not Raymond, but a younger woman named Claire, who had been watching the morning unfold with wide, attentive eyes, and said, "Process this at cost. And make it right." Claire nodded. There was no question about what making it right meant. Later, when the paperwork was being prepared, Victoria returned to the showroom floor and stood in front of Raymond. She had the video on her own phone now. She did not raise her voice. She said, very quietly, that the company's values around client dignity were not optional, were not contextual, and were not subject to individual interpretation based on the kind of car a customer arrived in. She said that Raymond's employment status would be reviewed by Human Resources by end of business Monday. She said that every person on the floor today would participate in a mandatory training session the following week. Raymond tried to speak. Victoria said, "I'm not finished." He stopped. She was finished when she decided she was finished, and not before. She told him, in measured sentences that contained more force than shouting ever could, that the video his customer had captured would be reviewed by the legal team, that the conduct she had observed on that recording was not a gray area, not a matter of interpretation, not a question of policy that needed clarification. It was a man being told he did not belong somewhere because of how he arrived, while his daughter stood beside him and heard it. That was not a customer service failure. That was a human failure, and it would be treated accordingly. Raymond's face passed through several stages, none of them dignified. She let him experience all of them. Then she turned her back on him and walked to the showroom floor, because there was still work to be done, and she had never been a woman who confused accountability with punishment, nor justice with revenge. Before the paperwork was complete, while Lily was being shown the interior features of the deep sapphire SUV by a patient sales associate, who had correctly identified that this child was the most important person in the room, Victoria asked Ethan if she could ask him something. He said yes. "After the accident," she said, "after you got me out, you didn't wait for the ambulance. You stayed long enough to make sure I was conscious, and then you left." Why? He thought about it. The question was sincere, and he tried to give it a sincere answer. "I was supposed to be somewhere," he said. "Sarah was waiting for me at home. We had dinner plans." A pause. "We didn't have a lot of dinner plans left, as it turned out, but I didn't know that then. I just knew I needed to get home." Victoria absorbed that. You had blood on your hand, she said. From the glass. Yeah. It wasn't as bad as it looked. You didn't even go to a hospital. I put a bandage on it at home. Sarah made me tea and told me I was dramatic. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly, involuntarily, at the memory. She was funny, Victoria said quietly. She was the funniest, he said, borrowing Lily's words without realizing it. There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that exists when two people have arrived at a mutual understanding that doesn't require additional language. Then Victoria said, I found out something interesting this morning. Before I came in, I had my assistant pull your file from the garage's service records. We have an account there for fleet vehicles. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You looked me up? I looked the truck up. Your name was on the registration. She paused. You were a mechanical engineer. Carnegie Mellon, 2009, graduated with honors. You spent 9 years at Vantage Industries. You were lead engineer on their commercial fleet division by 2016. You left a position at Vantage in 2018. He was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was shifting through the showroom glass, falling across the deep sapphire SUV in long, pale bars. A man who had been told this morning that he did not belong in this building had, in fact, spent nearly a decade designing the systems that made vehicles like these function. Sarah got diagnosed that spring, he said. The job required travel. 60% travel. I couldn't do 60% travel and be home for her. Vantage offered you remote options, Victoria said. I read the exit interview. He looked at her steadily. Remote wasn't enough. She needed someone there. In the room. Not on a screen. The steadiness in his eyes did not waver. It was not defensiveness. It was simply the settled certainty of a man who had made a decision he would make again and again, without requiring anyone's approval or understanding. Victoria understood, perhaps for the first time, the full shape of what she was looking at. Not just a mechanic in a worn shirt. Not just the man from the road. A mechanical engineer who had walked away from a career to sit in a hospital room. A man who had spent every dinner, every weekend, every quiet evening making sure the person he loved was not alone in the most frightening thing she would ever face. A man who then stayed, after she was gone, to raise the daughter she left behind, with exactly the same quality of presence. You've been working as a mechanic since then? She said. I like the work, he said. It's honest. The problem is in front of you, and you fix it, and you can see that you fixed it. A pause. Not everything works that way. She understood. She had built a company in an industry that worked, mostly, that way visible problems, measurable solutions, and she had chosen it partly for that reason, though she had never said so out loud. You're wasted there, she said. It came out more directly than she'd intended. He didn't flinch. I was exactly where I needed to be for 6 years, he said. Lily needed her father present. The garage let me be present. You can't waste someone who is exactly where they chose to be. Victoria thought about that. She thought about the executive she had fired 2 years ago for taking credit for a junior engineer's work, a man who had every credential and none of the character. She thought about the engineers she had interviewed over the past month for the position that had come open in September. All of them competent. Several of them impressive. None of them quite right in the way she could feel but couldn't always name. She thought about what it meant to be exactly where you chose to be, and whether she could say the same of herself on any given Thursday. When Lily came running back across the showroom floor to find her father, she was carrying a small brochure about the SUV's safety features that she had folded into a rough airplane shape. She had a look on her face that Ethan associated with enormous happiness, barely being contained by the normal dimensions of a human child. Daddy, she said, breathless, it has a thing that breaks by itself if someone walks in front of it. And it has a camera that shows you everything behind you. And she paused for drama. It has heated seats. Heated seats, Ethan repeated. Daddy. She looked at him. I've been sitting on regular temperature seats my entire life. He looked at his daughter, this small, bright, absolute person who smelled like the old detergent and had her mother's eyes and had been walking through the world with him. In that battered old truck, for 3 years of mornings that were sometimes very hard to get through. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Victoria." Victoria looked up from the paperwork she'd been reviewing with Claire. "I've decided something," Ethan said. She waited. "I'll take the car, and I'll pay for it, the full price, not at cost." He held up a hand before she could speak. "But there's something I'd like in return. Not the car. Something else." Victoria tilted her head. "There's an engineering position that came open at my company last week," she said carefully. "Head of Mechanical Systems, Fleet Development and Design. Our current lead retired in September." She had been building to this since the parking lot. She said it now because the moment had arrived, and she had learned, over 15 years in business, to trust the moments. "I know," she said. "I was going to ask." Ethan stared at her. "You were going to ask?" "Yes. Before you knew any of this, I looked up your educational record this morning, and I was going to ask." He stood very still for a moment, processing the specific improbability of the morning he was having. Then Lily said, from beside him, with perfect timing, "Daddy, say yes." He looked down at her. "It would mean less time at the garage," he said. To her more than to Victoria, more hours at first. It would be a transition. Lily thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "Mom would want you to be happy again," she said. Simply, without ceremony, the way children say the most important things. The showroom was very quiet. Ethan breathed in slowly. He looked at Victoria. He said, "What's the family support policy look like?" Victoria almost smiled. "We have a full family leave structure, on-site childcare at the main campus, and flexible scheduling for parents with primary custody. It's been in place for 3 years." 3 years, he said. "Since 2021. I introduced it in 2021. Yes." He absorbed that. Then he said, "Okay." Victoria did smile then, fully, quietly. The way people smile when something that should have happened a long time ago finally does. "Okay," she said. He signed the paperwork for the SUV at noon, using a pen that cost more than his lunch most days, sitting at a desk in the dealership he had been asked to leave that same morning. The irony was not lost on him. He carried it with a kind of equanimity that was, by now, simply his character. Lily sat beside him in the client chair, eating a biscuit someone had brought from the back, watching the proceedings with the focused gravity of a child who understood that something important was being documented. When it was done, Victoria walked them to the car. The deep sapphire SUV sat in the delivery bay, gleaming under the afternoon light in the particular way that new things gleam before the world has had a chance to touch them. Lily walked around it once, slowly, with her hands clasped behind her back, like a professor inspecting a specimen. Then she looked at her father and nodded once, seriously. He accepted the nod with equal gravity. But the old truck was still there, in the parking lot. Ethan stood beside it for a long time after the paperwork was done. With his hand resting on the warm hood, Victoria came to stand beside him. She said nothing for a while. "Are you selling it?" she finally asked. "No," he said. There was no hesitation. "I'm keeping it. It needs a lot of work. I know what it needs. I always have." He paused. "It's a part of the family. You don't sell a part of the family." Victoria looked at the truck, looked at the dented bumper, the electrical tape, the sun-bleached paint on the roof. She thought about the January afternoon, a decade ago, and a man who had not hesitated, who had pulled her out of a burning car, and stayed long enough to make sure she was breathing, and then gone home to have dinner with his wife, and had never asked for anything in return because it had never once occurred to him that he should. She thought about what that kind of person costs the world nothing, and gives it everything. She said, quietly, "I'd like to have it restored, if you'll let me. Fully. As it was when it was new." My team can do it. As a gift. Ethan looked at her. He thought about all the things he had been given and not been given in his life, the love he had chosen well, the grief that had arrived uninvited, the years of mornings that required everything he had and then asked for a little more. He thought about the calluses on his hands and the diploma in the box in the spare bedroom and the way Lily's laugh sounded on the days it arrived without warning, like summer. He said, "All right." The restoration took 3 weeks. Ethan did not visit the shop during those weeks. He had said he would let them do it, and he meant it. He was not a man who gave permission and then supervised, which was one of the reasons he had been good at his work and was going to be good at his new work. When the truck came back on a gray November Tuesday, it was parked in his driveway with a cloth cover over it, and a note on the windshield from Victoria's team saying simply, "Ready when you are." He uncovered it in the late afternoon, alone, while Lily was at a friend's house. He stood back and looked at it for a long time. It was everything it had once been, and more, the paint the exact red it had been in 1994. Deep and clean and warm as autumn. The interior restitched in the original tan fabric, the engine rebuilt with components that hummed instead of complained, the bumper straightened, the mirrors restored, the electrical tape gone. It looked the way it had looked the day he and Sarah drove it off the lot 20 years ago, laughing because they'd talked the dealer down by $400 and felt like they'd won something enormous. On the driver's seat, there was a card, small, white. No envelope, just 4 words, in black ink, in a handwriting that was precise and unhurried. Heroes rarely look rich. Ethan stood there in the driveway for a long time. In the gray November afternoon, reading those 4 words. Then, he read them again. He folded the card carefully, with the attention you give to something you intend to keep. He put it in the pocket closest to his chest, the inside pocket of his jacket, where it would stay warm. 3 months later, on a clear February morning, Ethan Parker drove to his first day at the Hale Automotive Group in the deep sapphire SUV, with Lily in the back seat wearing her yellow cardigan and explaining, at length, why blueberry was objectively the best color for all vehicles. He dropped her at the campus childcare center, which was warm and bright and smelled like paint and mild constructive chaos, and she walked in without looking back because she was that kind of child, comfortable in the world, trusting in the people who had made it safe enough to walk into. He parked in the lot outside the main building and sat for a moment in the quiet of the car. Then he got out and walked inside. The old red truck lived in the garage at home, beside the new SUV, covered with a tarp that he lifted once a week to check on it the way you check on something you love. Lily had named it, officially, in the solemn tradition of children naming things. She called it Granddad. He had not corrected her. That evening, he came home before dark for the first time in years. He made dinner, real dinner, with vegetables and a sauce that required actual attention, and they ate it at the table together, Lily telling him about a friend named Rosie who could whistle, and a boy named Marcus who couldn't tie his shoes, and a book they were reading about a dog who traveled across the country alone, which Lily found simultaneously impressive and irresponsible. Ethan listened to all of it. He was very good at listening. After dinner, while Lily was in the bath, he walked out to the garage and lifted the corner of the tarp on the old truck. He rested his hand on the hood, in the way he had done for years, in the way that meant different things at different times. Gratitude, grief, continuity. The refusal to let go of what had mattered. He looked up through the garage window at the winter sky, which was wide and deep and full of stars that had been there long before either of them, and would be there long after, burning their quiet fires for no one in particular, and everyone at once. He thought about Sarah, as he always did in the garage. He thought about the dinner they'd had planned that January evening, the one he'd driven home through the snow to keep. He thought about the way she used to say he was dramatic when he was being correct about something. He thought about how he would give anything for one more Tuesday with her. Even a Tuesday with spilled orange juice. He thought about Lily, asleep now in the house behind him, or almost asleep, or pretending to be asleep. He thought about the card in his pocket, not this pocket, but the jacket pocket, the pocket closest to his chest, where he had kept it since the day the truck came home. Heroes rarely look rich. He breathed in. The winter air was cold and clean, and smelled like pine, and the faint remnant of engine oil, which was the smell of everything he had built his life inside. He breathed out. He smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the kind of smile that belongs to people who have been through difficult things and arrived, unexpectedly, somewhere worth arriving at. The world had judged him by the car he drove, because they never saw the sacrifices inside it. But the people who mattered now knew, and Lily knew. And Sarah, wherever she was in the wide sky above the garage, knew too. That was enough. That had always been enough. He went inside. He checked on Lily, who was asleep with her arm thrown over the edge of the bed the way she slept when she was deeply, genuinely unconscious, rather than performing sleep. He stood in her doorway for a moment in the dark, watching the small rise and fall of her breathing. He thought about all the mornings he had stood here in the first year after Sarah died, when getting out of bed was its own small victory, and the day ahead was something to be endured rather than lived. He thought about how those mornings had slowly, incrementally, become something different, not easy, but possible, not painless, but worth it. Because of Lily, because she woke up every day and met the world with a directness and appetite that reminded him that the world was still a place worth meeting. He thought about the dinner they had tonight, the real dinner at the real table, and the conversation about Rosie who could whistle, and Marcus who couldn't tie his shoes, and the dog who traveled across the country and was impressive and irresponsible in equal measure. He thought about how that dinner had felt not significant, not special, just ordinary, in the way that only good things can be ordinary. Just Tuesday. Just the two of them. Just enough. He closed Lily's door softly. He made tea the way Sarah used to make it, with the bag left in too long, the way that made it slightly too strong, the way he had learned to prefer it because it tasted like her being right. He sat at the kitchen table and drank it slowly, in the quiet of a house that was full of everything that mattered to him. And he let the quiet be quiet. The world had judged him by the car he drove, because they never saw the sacrifices inside it. But the people who mattered now knew, and Lily knew, and Sarah, wherever she was in the wide sky above the garage, knew too. That was enough. That had always been enough.